So welcome to a edition of the Secure Dynamics TechCast. With me, I have a past guest, Wendy Pfeiffer, who's the CIO at Nutanix. Welcome back, Wendy.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We live in strange times, but let's let's not go down the topic du jour, which is all over the place, right? I actually wanted to start about a an op-ed article that you had authored on CNBC, which the title itself I found to be very interesting because it starts. I'm going to read this, which says, "Why companies need to stay in emergency mode during phase 2 of remote work." And it actually brings out what all of us are dealing with, which is that we used to having dealing with emergencies for a short period of time. Now we're talking about an extended period. And you had listed a few things, and I'll just call out one thing that you did, which is we just successfully navigated what is arguably the most significant workforce pivot in modern history. But rather than having time to rest on our laurels, we are now facing the requirement to maintain this new emergency mode for weeks and months to come. And as a CIO, as somebody who leads a large organization, number one, how do you come to terms with the fact that whether it's fatigue, whether it's other sorts of like human emotions that fall into play when you like what you call this extended period of running on emergency fuel?
Well, I mean, first, just in great humility, I'm not sure. I am human, and I am struggling with this as well.
Yeah.
You know, one of the challenges with leading people, whether that's as a parent or as a department leader or as a corporate leader, is that the first thing that people do is they watch to see what we're doing, and they follow our example. And so, you know, whether I'm going grocery shopping or I'm sending a quick Slack message or I'm writing an article for CNBC, I'm aware that people are essentially watching to see what I do. And so I'm trying to be, I think the first key is to be incredibly transparent. This is a good thing for IT anyhow. Just be incredibly transparent, incredibly open about the things that are going well and the things that are not going well. And, you know, we do that by collecting metrics in IT and then publishing those metrics so we can just see. And one of the challenges with collecting metrics all the time is that it's easy to discover that there were things that were broken, you know, pre-pandemic, and you know, some of those things turn out to be no big deal now, and other things turn out to be, you know, the straw that breaks the camel's back right now. And so I think it's just being transparent about those things, and also being transparent about the fact that we cannot figure out what's going to happen next. Because we can't figure out what's going to happen next, we need to, you know, it's sort of like if you're a boxer, just, you know, and you're in the ring, just because the guy just hit you in the stomach doesn't mean that you can go like, well, that's it, you know, he hit me, that's as bad as it can get. You have to be ready, and it's physically ready for that next punch, and the punch after that, and the punch after that. Like, you can't get out of the ring mentally. And you have to prepare yourself physically and emotionally. And then as a leader, how do we translate that to our people and to our processes and to our infrastructure? And finally, this emergency mode isn't just single threaded, right? This is, you know, the initial emergency was, how do we pivot from one mode to another? The ongoing emergency is, how do we sustain all the modes all the time? And that's a different class of emergency, I would say.
Yeah, so just double clicking on that, because that was something you called out in the article as well, right? Just the optionality that you as a leader need to provide to the broader employees at Nutanix. And again, the learning that comes with, okay, like you mentioned, there's the chaos. And then there's the just, hey, let's get it back to at least normal. But then the NPI scores, you're actually at or even better than what you were before, right? So a lot of that, like you said, starts with self-awareness, but also realizing that we need to be able to take those punches, but also start giving back.
Yeah. I mean, so there's so much that goes into this. First of all, I decided to be self-actualized myself as a leader. Mm-hmm. Sometimes as leaders, we get stuck in our ways of working, but we also get stuck inside of our own governance and authority structure. It's weird. Sometimes being in charge is less freeing than being an individual contributor.
Yeah.
And it's just a thing, whether you're in IT or somewhere else. So the first thing I did is realize, all right, well, I can write code. It's slow and stupid code because I haven't been technical in a really long time. I can configure a router, but I'm much slower than the average bear because it's been a really long time. But what I am, the tools I do have is I own budget, I own org structure, I own roles and responsibilities, I own governance, I'm an example, I own that thing, and I own our objectives overall. And so I realized that those things needed to change, and they needed to change as I understood what we were doing. When we first pivoted to remote work, I understood it as a sprint. The goal was as quickly and as efficiently as possible get through this transition, so that we're across the finish line and we're 100% remote and it's working. That was cool. Then that 100% remote emergency mode sprint thing, well, living on those same calories and that same training program, it went on for months and months. Right. And so now those are different muscles. I mean, sustaining that mode long term, those are marathon muscles, right? That you fuel your system differently. You work differently. Now we're in this time where some people are coming back into offices. And so we need to enable people to work effectively in our offices. We need to enable people to work effectively in environments where social distancing is in place and masks are in place, but not everyone can return to offices in all geographies, in all roles. We have folks who might be able to return to an office under normal circumstances, but they're responsible for being home while their children are attending school remotely. We have environments around the world where people pivot to return to offices and then they pivot to return home. And so ultimately, as I look to the future of work is hybrid. It's much more remote than it used to be, but it's not completely remote. It's a mixed mode. And so now we have this, we've run the sprint and we successfully crossed the finish line. Now we've managed to stay in the race during the longer term marathon and we figured out how to fuel ourselves. But now we have the complexity of, I don't know what to call it, a triathlon, a decathlon. It's all the sports. Long term with moments of sprints along the way. And so how do we sustain? How do we fuel ourselves? Well, one thing that I own is I own the description of roles and responsibilities. And so I have actively worked to redefine every role in IT. So today, I no longer have people whose responsibility it is to sit alone by themselves in isolation and write code for 8 to 10 hours a day. Because it turns out that having a large team of people who individually sit by themselves and write code all day requires a very high level of collaboration and coordination that the current circumstances don't adequately support. Plus, emotionally, especially if those people who are doing that are on their own, are sheltering in place by themselves in their own small apartment, it's emotionally
very draining.
Unsustainable. On the other end of the spectrum, I have roles in IT of people who were in technical support roles, whose job it was to be on 2 or 3 calls and a couple of Slack conversations and helping people with problems for an extended, 8 to 10 hours a day. And if those folks are, for example, sitting at home in their small apartment with their spouse and their 2 kids sharing the same internet, look, it's inhumane to be focused on other people sitting at your kitchen table with your kids running around for 10 hours. You cannot do that. It's not sustainable. But what is sustainable is allowing people to create the mix of those kinds of functions that are appropriate for their roles. And so that was a scary thing, right? I had to sort of open up the ingredient book and allow people to choose the ingredients that they needed. And then redefine the roles. So now every role has a mix of this focused solitary work and this collaborative work. The next thing we had to do was allow people to declare the times that they were available and the times that they were not available. And so as an example, if I've got small kids at home, maybe very early in the morning, say from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m., I can be, online interacting, but then I need a break in the middle of the day. And then at the end of the day, I can do some focused work once the kids are in bed or something. And so we also allowed people to declare, here's when I'm available. So we had this kind of mix of all these inputs that then allowed us to reconstitute schedules. And ultimately, we had to augment some of these things. We had to augment some of the roles and some of the schedules, but we also found we had, interestingly, a little more capacity. So when we got to the end of that moment, the last thing we needed to do is we needed to reorganize. And that was another tool that I had in the toolbox that I could work with, is my org structure. And so, this is all of these things. We already knew these principles, but it was easy to not have to apply them.
Correct.
But what I learned is I needed smaller teams, and we needed to use agile methodologies to break the work into manageable chunks. And we needed to focus teams on important things for this moment. So for example, I created an end user computing team, and members of that team came from my previous cybersecurity team. They came from my client engineering team. They came from application services, but together they now focus on the end user computing experience of our employees. And that's inclusive of access controls and cybersecurity. It's inclusive of our VDI tools like Frame and Citrix. It's inclusive of the devices, the range of devices that people are using in home environments, and knowledge of internet. And it's inclusive of the audiovisual experience as well, and the tooling that folks use with that. And so here's this team of folks, including help desk and support people, who are just focused on that. So when we have an end user computing challenge, the team comes together and ensures that we meet that challenge securely, performantly, and to the delight of our employees. And so those tools are things that all of us have, and it's just a matter of realizing, even if I have to tell my team members, this is temporary, I don't even know what's going to happen next month. Maybe next month all of California will be on fire, and then we'll have new challenges, right? But even in that moment, we're exercising these muscles of transition from one mode to the other mode to the other mode of the race. Ultimately, those muscles of transition are the most interesting. The transitions, the transformations, the change from one mode to the other is the most interesting part of hybrid cloud to automate. These are the things that are most ripe and ready for infrastructure as code, software defined things, machine learning and natural language processing things. And so we have this rich training ground for the next phase of this race.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you've covered a lot of ground over there, and I could not agree more. Again, just this, but the way you've kind of put it all together and I mean, essentially held a mirror to yourself and your team, saying how do we decompose and rearrange. And to your point about the data that you're collecting right now is absolutely rife for doing fantastic things in the future for prediction. So, Wendy, always great chatting with you. And again, continue doing the amazing job that you're doing both inside and outside. I know you're extremely active. I just saw on the tipping thing that you had talked about getting people who are otherwise not getting their daily bread to be able to make lives a little bit easier. So again, hats off to you. Again, not just within the confines of what you're doing within IT, but also to help the broader population. Again, thanks, Wendy, and looking forward to our next chat.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Me too.
Bye-bye.